I'm really excited to have you here. 3 years ago, I think, when we met through a mutual friend and you invited me to the Billy Can, your palace of love and strength and wellness. And I just saw a home absolutely surrounded by inspiring motivational words and quotes. And I met this like beaming giant of joy riding a motorcycle and building cool things. And I was like, wow, this is empowering, just being in presence. And then you walked me through your origin story and where you've come from and the environment that you grew up in and the poverty that you were exposed to and the way in which you, I guess, took matters into your own hands to build the kind of independence and security that I guess those around you couldn't offer. And yeah, I was like, wow. So you've done incredible things, Cole, building banks and companies and financial systems and games and raising a son. I think like what's really stood out to me most is how you lead yourself throughout all of that. So I kind of wanted to use that as a jumping off point for our chat today. What's been the hardest part for you about learning how to lead yourself?
Wow. I think just trust, David. I think, as you and I have often talked about, life is so unknown, and also as you and I speak about often, I have a strong belief that, nature and the universe and the broader world is kind of operating at according to its own operating system. There's this operating system out there, with a set of rules and a set of direction and a sort of set of guardrails and a set of outcomes and a set of beliefs and a set of patterns. And it doesn't always suit us. I don't believe that's God, by the way, that you can call it God. Just think it's the universe operating with its thing. But regardless, I think, we've got all these things and we rail against them and we get frustrated and we get angry because we're not getting the outcomes we want. And I think that's been the biggest learning is that almost all of the time, everything that's happening is perfect. Unless you kind of get to that point and you kind of accept the sort of the duality of your insignificance, but also your power. So you get the balance between those two things. That there's this kind of thing going on that you're a small part of, right? Yeah, there's this micro, tiny blip on the universal operating system that you're largely ineffectual, and nothing that you're going to do is going to change the direction of what's going on. But then at the same time, you're in control of of how you respond to that, how you accept that and take advantage of that. And when you get that balance right, it takes a long time it took me a long time to really understand that. As I got stuck in my own ego or my own hedonistic or my own attachment to things and all of that stuff. When you get through all of that and go, actually, you get a bit more relaxed, kind of get a little attached from it, then, and you get in the flow of it, then it's a beautiful thing. Took me a long time to figure that simple thing out.
For sure, yeah. And I can relate. I feel like it's somewhat a rite of passage we have to go through. It certainly has been my experience as well, having to do the chasing and the hedonism and seeking the pleasure and realizing that, that's what I'm looking for isn't found in those things, to finally loosen the grip of my ego and learn how to acknowledge that I am insignificant. I still have power, like you said, which is beautiful, and I'm a sovereign being, but like at the end of the day, I can't control my outcomes. And so I don't know if we can get to that place, or I don't know if whoever's listening right now can get to that place just by hearing about it. I feel like you have to go through the shit. Like, and what did that look like for you? You talked about the attachments and that ego-driven behavior, and to kind of get to this place of surrender or oblivion.
Yeah, I think there's probably a couple of moments along the way that you kind of get there, and certainly some big gifts along the way. So maybe just to sort of go into origin a little bit, to sort of make it real for some folk. So I grew up in New Zealand. I had this massive kind of curiosity for the world and postgraduate degree and was fortunate enough, and this is kind of part of the story. And then I got offered a scholarship to do my PhD, and what I was working on, pretty nice, school in London. And so, headed off and, I was all pretty chest puffy. I was pretty excited and, I felt pretty proud of, what I've been doing, given my background and stuff. And now here I was heading off to London. So, do my PhD at a, pretty reputable college. And I was, nervous, but also pretty excited. And then got there and then college, ran out of funding. And then I was sort of back on the other side of the world with, no money and, a one-way ticket and no way of getting home and stuck in the city and big miles away. And so I was like, oh God, what do we do now? My girlfriend at the time, I said, well, what are we going to do? She was just like, well, just figure it out. It's just, we're here, we're young, we're smart, we've got skills, I've got a job. So it was pretty cool. She was pretty empowering. Then, so yeah, a few things sort of happened, and then what they led to was, I was like, well, what am I going to do? I said, what can I do, right? I've got good math skills, and so I could go and, there was plenty of jobs for traders and stuff in the city of London and all. There was, I could ride a motorcycle, so I could be a motorcycle courier. I was kind of like my legs. But I could also program a computer. In the 90s, and, computers were increasingly a thing, and everyone was looking for programmers. And I taught programming at university. I was doing my postgrad, so got myself a job as a programmer. A few years later, the internet started to arrive, and we built an internet banking company, and we took internet banking to the world. 20 largest banks actually to the internet on the trade finance side. The first set of strong cryptographic solutions to secure the internet. It was a great business. I mean, we did really well. Sold all around the world to some of the biggest enterprises in the world, and we ended up selling that business to Netscape. And we were like, we're part of the crew that built the internet, and we feel pretty proud about that. But the reason I tell that story is that it's a good example of how we kind of, we were pretty, egos got in the way, and we're pretty ballsy, and there's a lot of arrogance and a lot of bad behaviour that kind of, came to and all of that. And I think, and that led to some, that from that great high to some, just to some real lows actually, and it's kind of weird. And you kind of see it. I see, especially in sports, where you see these young guys coming into, a lot of money and a lot of fame, and how they all end up, addicted and, to drugs and alcohol and all sorts of things as they sort of struggle with, that level of success. And it's a really good example of, we want all of that stuff, but then we're really uncomfortable with it, right? And you talk a lot about, and it's a difficult thing to just to accept this thing. I certainly struggle with it, right? To accept that not only were we worthy of it, so that's definitely a thing, but that at the same time, it wasn't really just us. Right? It wasn't really me or even two of the three guys that, I built that business with. A lot of things a lot of people had to do a lot of things, and a lot of things had to go our way to make all of that happen. Right time, right space. We had a couple of, what looked like luck from the inside for things to go our way. And so, but we had no counsel around us to be able to respond to that whole process with gratitude. Right. We ended up just responding to it with ego and arrogance and bullshit. And as a result, and then, so I think, that's probably a pretty rambly answer to the whole thing, but hopefully this will bring it back. And many examples of that, sort of from big wins to, low points, as you start to just play with this tiger of life and get to the point where you just sort of breathe into it and allow it to happen, and to take it to the next phase, and to accept it and to be grateful. And if you're able to do that and just stay with it and to detach yourself from it and just enjoy it, but not get too caught up in that ego of it, then glorious things can happen. But damn, that takes a lot to figure out.
Lifelong journey. Yeah. And that seems so common. Like you pointed out, you hear it all the time with individuals who achieve great things and are, celebrated in popular culture and in the media, their mental health goes down the drain. And so many actors and celebrities have certainly come out recently talking about their mental health challenges. So it's great that, that's out in the public and the narrative is being normalized. But why do you think it was so hard for you and your team members to hold that level of success or achievement with grace and with gratitude? Like what you got in the...
I think it's an upper limit problem. And I think that book, The Big Leap, is just, one of the most amazing things I've ever read. And I think that's what it was, right? And I certainly think you talk about worthiness. So, and again, I don't actually know what was going on for my co-founders at the time. Young to touch a little bit, but, we haven't had that conversation. So I can't really speak for them with, their ability to look into the past and have that discussion. So I can't speak for them. But I can speak for myself and I just know that I despite how well we were doing and, where we were going and all of those things, I still think I had an upper limit problem. I didn't expect to get that far so quickly. I didn't believe I should be there. I had, that classic, entrepreneurs, dilemma about, my worthiness and, and all that comes with it, the money, the titles, the fame, the travel, the assets, the everything that comes with all of those things. To just, have a belief that I was, that not only that I was worthy of those things, but actually worthy of way more. I still had limits around myself that had been created from my childhood and, all of those things. And I didn't really know, what I was worthy of. I internal limits around all of those things. And that's what creates all of that. And so, it's this sort of idea that, if you can live every day and, feel really comfortable expanding in success and abundance and love and continue to push those boundaries further and further away and do that in a way that not only allows you to grow, but that also allows you to inspire others to do the same. Good things can happen if you really believe that there is unlimited amounts of love and success and money and assets and there's no limit to it. And that you're a part of it all. There's no necessary success in any of it. It's just about expanding and, as we were saying yesterday, just breathing in and taking a big bite and having a crack. You're worthy of it all. And the only thing getting in your way is you and your ability to figure out where your limits are and to feel joy and worthy and goodness around all of those things. And that's the only thing getting in the way.
Mic drop. That's beautiful. And I think for someone listening who may have been exposed to that, childhood conditioning that you touched on as well, might feel difficult to grasp, or it might feel or sound like that sounds too good to be true. Like there's really an unlimited source of love or success or wealth or whatever it is. And, that's certainly been part of my journey to try and realize that for myself. And I'm still trying to figure it out. And, I think growing up with parents who, arrived in Australia from Romania in 1981 with a couple of suitcases and 3 grand to their name, coming from very, humble beginnings, poverty-stricken areas, that, that whole narrative that, you are entitled to unlimited amounts of success or whatever you want, like you can have it. It just wasn't part of my programming or conditioning. And so I'm curious, I guess, to hear what was your programming or conditioning, your upbringing like? How were you able to kind of, I guess, unhook from the matrix? So I guess, deprogram yourself from those upper limits that have been created.
Lovely. And I the origin story, similar to yours with your parents arriving from Romania. My parents arrived in New Zealand in the 60s, 10-pound ponds. Life in the ghettos of Glasgow was pretty rough, through the 50s and 60s, and not only was it hard, I think going through a time where, like Glasgow was an industrial city, being very, very much part of the Troubles in Northern Ireland for a very, very long time. It was a very violent place. Yeah. And whilst it was also a very, very violent place, it was also subject to, as the Industrial Revolution was happening, and there was a big, massive power shift in terms of where stuff was getting built and what was getting built and how it was getting built, a lot like it is now. The shipbuilding was the major industry, and it was falling away, and so there was a lot of and so there was this poverty cycle that was getting driven by increasing amounts of unemployment and so on and so forth. Whilst these religious trolls, as a backbone of violence, continued to pervade the city, so it was rough and tough, and so my mum and dad decided to leave all of that and go to New Zealand, but they brought with them, in deference to them, and I love them both dearly, and both of them passed away now. But they brought with them a very Calvinistic, approach to life and money. And, that do, to continue this sort of language that, there was limited amounts of money. And not only that, but these strange Calvinistic notions, a lot of them are in the Bible around, I don't know the language specifically, but, there's words in the Bible around, it's harder for a rich man to enter the kingdom of God than it is for a camel to, walk through the eye of an eagle, those sorts of things. And so these sorts of things, written by the lords of the church to keep those people down, humble view. And they pervade all through those societies, right? Because it's good for the warlords and the overlords to keep the people down. And they did a very, very good job of, creating these cultures to keep their nose to the grindstone and to keep them in poverty. And that kind of works for the people at the top.
Way to control.
Right, way to control the masses. And so, and you can see that today if you look through, a lot of the cultures around the world where you see a lot of this, this behavior pervading. And, we're lucky to see it and watch it from here and go, because people see what these people are doing to you, right? But, so it's not as if those problems have gone away. But I was certainly brought up in those cultures in New Zealand in the, in the 60s where, we had a very, very strange view of money. But at the same time, it was the mid 70s, and we were struggling. My dad wasn't making much money, and, we were trying to figure out where the money should go to work and stuff. And so as part of that, we took on a Department of Social Welfare family home, and all of a sudden I went from having, 2 brothers and sisters to having 14 brothers and sisters. And so, so the other 12 to 13 brothers and sisters in my house for 2 years were, all sorts of kids that were, on the streets, and, the children of, drug families, gang families, and kids that were constantly out of trouble. And so, we were right in the middle. See it right up close, poverty and violence and crime, living and all of that. And, it's tough growing up in New Zealand, and, some of those, Polynesian, societies and cultures where, academic success was frowned upon, and, you really had to, earn your stripes, on the rugby field and on the street and on, the playground, and, lots of blues and barneys and scraps, and, it's proper tough. And I was like, I'm just not liking it. And I couldn't get it from, my mum and dad were just, their nose right on the grindstone. Right? So no, and, as my mum said to me when I was in my teens, she says, you've got access to philosophy and stuff. I've got no idea about any of these things. So I started having conversations with her about these things. And she was like, Colin, I've got no idea. You're lucky enough to be able to have the thoughts of these things. They're lucky enough to have those thoughts. We were just like paycheck to paycheck and trying to survive the violence. It's like, wow, okay. So those were the stages. And I said, and so I got my first milk run, so I had my first job at the age of 9 or 10 or something like that. So I was up at 5 in the morning, pushing milk carts around and starting to get my own money, and so it was from a very, very early age, I started to get that level of independence. And then I started to understand that. And I looked for my parents for help, and I said, like, I want to do this more. Like, we know what to do. You are on your own, but we wish you lots of luck. We wish you well, but I wish you ill. But we've got nothing we can do for you other than clap from the sidelines and applaud your efforts. So but that's kind of nice for Mum. My mum is incredibly vulnerable to sort of at least come to that point. It's like, okay, then deep breath and go, and did that, at a very, very early age. And these were conversations I was having with my mum at the age of 10, 11, 12, 13. So real young to sort of go, okay, all right, we'll just have to put my nose out front and see what happens.
Thank you for sharing about that. Because, I mean, I would have said there's very few, I don't know, maybe it's just an assumption, but like there's so many kids that would be in that position all around the world. And I feel like there'd be a small proportion of those that would say, oh, you know what, I'm actually going to take matters into my own hands and, grab the bull by the horns and I'm going to create my own destiny. I feel like you have to be in an immense amount of pain and to really feel trapped to want to break free from that.
Maybe, or just have a lot of courage and, have a, whatever. It doesn't necessarily have to come from a place of pain. It could be just a desire to change. And it can come from many places. It could come from a place of love. It certainly came from a place of love from my mother. Beautiful. And whilst I was suffering pain in the schoolyard and, many of those things at the time, I was also, lucky to have my dad too, but particularly my mum, came from a strong place of love and support for all of those things. I remember coming home from school one day, I was probably 10 or 11, around that sort of very critical time, and coming home, black eyes and busted lips and smashed in noses from another fight in the schoolyard and being attacked and bullied and all of that stuff. It was brutal. I was a proper fight. And, Dad would go, what's wrong with you? I was like, I was being mugged by all these kids at school. And he's like, what are you doing about that? And I was very little support. I was like, well, you're a boxer. You're not born in the streets of Glasgow. And give me some lessons. He's like, nah.
Mike Tyson situation.
So, maybe, and I've only stuck again being now for sure. So, I started getting tough and just hardened up, joined the second row, took a job block, to the edge of the room of the scrum. Just leaned in.
Well, then, at what point were you able to drop the belief that, at what point did you realize I am entitled to all of the success and abundance and love that I
Oh, don't know, David. I think, I really don't know. And, I think about some of the roles. So we've gone through some of the business, and, I was working for one of the biggest tech companies at the time, kind of called Sun Microsystems, that built Java and, done amazing things under the leadership of a CEO called Scott McNeely. He's an amazing guy. Built that great business and really built the foundations of much of the internet in terms of the servers and Java as the software architecture and, then bought Netscape, so bought us the browser and bought us email. We built BPay here in Australia and Big Pole. It was such an amazing business. So it wasn't long after we sold the business, we came up, I got tapped to be Scott's chief of staff. And I'd only just arrived in Australia, only been probably on the ground. Scott's been picked it up, why don't you take you back in with Scott's chief of staff? And I was like, one of Scott's bag carrier?
running coffees.
Running coffees for the big fella. But I didn't have the curiosity or the, I didn't have the curiosity, the understanding to sort of drill in and go, well, what does it actually mean? And, what I'd have to do and where would that go? And I didn't even have the understanding to just drill into that. I didn't have no one sitting down going, oh, this is a pathway. It's lucky, really. But wherever it had come from, it didn't have that moment. And I just arrived, and we'd been running pretty hard for a long time, and I just want to be at the beach. We've got some work to do here. But it was one of those moments that I often reflect on, not with any particular regret, but I think it was one of those things that if I had the models that I have now, and I talk about that ability to just keep breathing into it, I would have breathed right into that, right? But because I was suffering with I'd gone to that place and I was uncomfortable with my limit levels, I was still kind of, roiling in it a little bit. And so, as a few years passed, I sort of I'd reflected on it and go, that's an interesting moment there, right? that I started to understand where these limits were applying. I could see when I looked back, I was like, there was my upper limits that got in the way of me saying yes. Well, not even just saying yes, but at least breathing into that and being more curious about that as an opportunity. Just allowing it to happen, then I felt very, I can, I started thinking I felt quite pressured around that. There was intensity to it. And that intensity was all coming from me. It wasn't coming from anyone else. I was just all making that up in my head. And so I started to, as I started to look back and reflect on some of those sorts of things and started to understand what was going on for me, and that sort of started to understand these models around limit and how it was just me imposing those things, those emotional limits, those financial limits, those physical limits, those intellectual limits, all of those stuff. So limits that I had that I had in myself in terms of what I was truly capable of. There's a few of those moments along the time, as life traveled on around, that, we talk about the tall poppy syndrome here a lot as well in Australia, where, as you start to rise up, it can be very lonely out there, and that's part of the upper limit problem, is you get up and you get out. There's no one out there. You're in this middle of these clouds and you think it's all amazing, but there's no one there with you. So you drop back down again, and now you start to create some of those limits again. And it's the same true in all of these things, whether it's an emotional limit inside a relationship in terms of your ability to expose and be vulnerable and share love, whether it's with money and your ability to deal with that and have assets and be proud about it, especially when you're coming from a place of poverty and all your connections and, everybody like, okay, mate, well, who do you think you are? And all of that sort of stuff just helps you come back down and be smaller. So we're just not really, so I just started, really playing with that. And then through that, just to kind of maybe, go past that a little bit, then starting to explore that, to explore a lot of the Eastern wisdoms, particularly to start to explore the philosophers, as I start to really sort of understand that life is not a straight, there's not a playbook, there's not a straight set of rules that largely we read. And so I started to sort of figure out, and found out the Bible and Christian religion hadn't taught much about that at all, because actually that whole thing was about making us smaller and being differential to this thing called God. And it was just like, it doesn't make any sense to me. So then started exploring some of the other wisdoms, the other traditions to us, and then the philosophies, and I was really getting into the the stuff we I love talking about how do you live deeply and well, and just starting to explore all the wisdom around all that stuff, and then you start to figure out, there's something in here I can really breathe into.
Yeah, no, I feel that there's no or it makes sense as to why that knowledge and wisdom has really stood the test of time, right? There's value in there. And I mean, I really relate to what you said. I think some what stood out to me is just around the tall poppy syndrome. That's certainly been part of my experience as well, where there's this it was quite a toxic culture where, subtly feel pressured to almost minimize our accomplishments or achievements to fit in. And get met with envy or jealousy when we really start pursuing our dreams and our goals for ourselves in our life.
And also, by the way, I do think we imagine a lot of that as well, because they just think, when if you just zoom out properly, they're actually not too bad at celebrating success. Like in all cultures, right? Australia, New Zealand, think about sports teams particularly. We love celebrating the success. Sports success is well celebrated. Financial success is reasonably well celebrated. Yeah. Academic success is well celebrated. Scientific success is well celebrated. So there's lots of reference points that we're actually to look at and go, we do celebrate as a culture here, Europe, America, everywhere in the world, we're actually quite good at celebrating success. But then the corollary of that is that we're not very good at understanding how to really deeply embrace it and allow it, and do all that to recognize that too. As we've been saying, that we're all absolutely entitled to it. We've got all of these amazing attributes to go to actually whatever we want to do. And we keep saying it, and it's if you look at talk about, people like to go, Tony Robbins and all these guys, all these conferences, so all of this knowledge is around all of these things. And we still act small. Vast majority of people and the depth of inside of the culture, it's still pretty small behavior, still pretty small thing. And just do a little bit, it'll be enough. I think about the aspirations of, if I may sound like a bit of a dick, the aspirations of most people are pretty tiny. I want to get a house, have a family and a car and a fluffy dog. That's getting us what? So that's in contrast to, our desire to actually celebrate success and build systems for success, build great university, build great counselling and coaching capabilities in our societies. And we're still around here living, as Sadhguru says, we're still bad and mostly like women.
Oh. No, I think a lot of them are just been engineered by the society and culture and possibly parents as well. And I think, learning how to transcend that and I guess ask myself what I really value, what really lights me up, I think has really helped me. For instance, with this podcast, right? I love having these kind of conversations. It really makes me come alive.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of value in that. And I want to share it with other people because I can see how it can, help. If you can help one person, then I feel so jazzed and it will, fill up my cup all the way to the top. And so, you talk about, ancient wisdom and Eastern practices and all of that. That's certainly been part of my journey as well, to learn how to identify these limits that I've just self-imposed or inherited, choose to, like we've spoken about, to live life fully. So I'm keen to hear what practices, what pieces of ancient wisdom you talk about, Sadhguru, which of these sources of inspiration have had the biggest influence on you?
Well, I know where it comes from, but I think this EQ thing has just obviously been a big bit for me. Understanding emotions and when emotions happen to you, and I don't know where this comes from, but there's been a lot of work generally around it. And it's this sort of understanding that we have emotions for a reason, and when emotions happen to us, we don't just have to give in to them and get caught up in the wave of that emotion. We're absolutely allowed to get curious about that emotion and understand what it is that I'm getting triggered about. Why am I responding this way? How do I choose to respond? So that whole piece of work, I think, is just critical and fascinating. And when you get your head into it, it's your instinct or your emotions they're such a great radar. They really show you where your limits are. They show you where you're getting hurt. They show you where you're allowing yourself to get hurt. All that stuff. So I think there's a piece of work in there. I don't know what that's called, but I just call it EQ. There's certainly been a lot of work in there. And I tell you, God bless him, it was certainly been amazing. Right. So I went through the whole, LPP, did the Tony thing. And I think just that, that piece of wisdom from him around, limiting beliefs, he did, it's a real cool part of his work. And he just says, it's just really worth questioning your beliefs. No, it's our beliefs that limit us. And it's funny how we get it. Our beliefs allow us to, build some safety. Right? We have the set of structured beliefs, right? And it allows us to be confident and tell people that we know it all, come from a place of ego. And it's largely our beliefs that give it to us that. And as soon as you ask yourself, where did that belief come from? So you have this belief about something, like money or love or finance or body or whatever. So you have this belief because there's if you believe that there's very little truths in the world, we structure these beliefs. They're largely these things that give us this safety and this confidence. Right? But then you ask yourself, where did that belief come from? Most of us don't even know. Right? We're just, to your point, given to us by our parents, and we just adopted it unconsciously, and we just taken that as part of the baggage that we carry on through life. And so it's kind of the meeting of some of those sorts of ideas really that started to formulate the idea that you've got these limiting beliefs and we're not questioning them. So start questioning them. So every time you have a belief and you think confidently and 100% that's a thing or absolutely that's the truth, then just peel it out And just go, well, is it really, where did that come from? What's things? And you go, yeah, it's a thin veil to just give me some ego and some confidence structure to actually throw it away until it happens. Maybe try the opposite. So there's a whole thing that you start playing with it, and then use your EQ to kind of just see when you're getting tested, when you getting into your boundaries and you're starting to have these emotional responses and stuff. Just realize that's just a boundary for you that you haven't bashed through yet. You start playing around with some of those things and you're starting to start just expanding your size. Because you realize that it's just you, right? It's just your stuff. So own it, figure out whether it's true or not, flip it around, see if the opposite also works, or maybe the opposite works better for you, and just start playing around with it, right? Realize that your parents came from this, this rural place in Italy or Romania or Scotland or where it often they were operating different set of circumstances for you. And all of the things that they came to you came from a place of love, but are largely irrelevant to living in 2025. Throw them away, try something different and expand way beyond their limiting beliefs and don't take them on. Move beyond it, right? So, okay. And in actual fact, they want you to. They just gave you beliefs because that's what they had, not necessarily because they were true or not. It's just because that's what they were operating under, and they actually want you to be bigger than that. If they look to you from their grave now, they just go, oh, thank God you figured that out, Dave. Thank God you throw that away. Maybe your dad wouldn't be like that, but I bet your granddad would be like that. So, throw it away. Chuck it away. So I think that was really cool. And then, stoicism, it's the kind of thing at the moment a little bit, even though it's 2,000 years old, and just a big, big fan of stoicism with a big capital S around, really testing how you respond to stuff. Stop reacting, start responding, figuring out, what you can control and what you can't control. It's, Epictetus and Seneca and Marcus, and, it's pretty mind-blowing stuff. And, I was just in the middle of reading, meditations and all of those at the moment. And I read some of the meta, interpretations of it, and now just going back to the original works. And, it's pretty empowering. You look at some of the stuff and, with Marcus particularly, and, he was at war writing his meditations. So it was just a random set of thoughts as he was, in the middle of war and all of those things. So, yeah, it's pretty good. It's probably a more recent development of those works.
I love that. I love it, yeah, and throw it away. I think that's such a great, takeaway that I hope, whoever's listening can at least open their mind and heart to as well, because I look at beliefs like the rules that you create for your reality. It's like, these are the rules that I'm playing by. And just notice that, what you believe will ultimately influence what you think about. If you believe that it's a hostile place, then you're naturally going to think that everyone's out to get you or take from you. You're naturally going to feel quite anxious, quite defensive. That's going to influence your conduct. Whereas if you're open to the idea that actually, the universe is friendly, you're going to start running a completely different problem.
Totally. The thing that just triggered that for me actually is that we, there's been a lot of work done on this, is that we're so often operating unconsciously. And what we're seeking as part of that unconscious operating system is validation and safety. And so when you get that, by the way, you can throw it away, right? You can realize that your validation is irrelevant, right? You're okay. You don't need to prove yourself. Like, stop it. That you don't have to hoard. You don't have to come from this place of limit. You can come from this place of abundance. There is actually no fear. People often, my board particularly, some of my leadership, they're like, is that not key person risk? Oh, you'd rather you go dining and hanging out with great white sharks and riding motorcycles at speed when you need it. I'm like, we can get a business and some customers and stuff. Can you just not do that? And I'm like, no, I cannot not do that. I must do that, right? I must live from a place of without, and it's not, as I say, it's not, people say, you've got to be careful. I said, no, you've got to be, and it's not about being careless, but it is about being carefree. It's the balance, right? It's not careless. It's not careful. It's just being feeling carefree. It's okay. And as you are more carefree, you just go, yeah, nothing happened. Nothing bad happened here. This big shark came in, we're in there, 30 meters of clear blue water up in Foster, and that big, beautiful 4.5 meter great white shark came into that, big school of whitefin tuna and, just shredded the sashimi right in front of us. And it was just beautiful. Right? It was like, what did you do? And I just dropped my jaw in awe and celebrated the moment because nothing bad happened. That's, another good example. Coming into corner one at the end of Phillip Island, into turn one, knee down, 320 kilometres an hour into the right-hand turn, trust the process, brake late, help right, get on the accelerator hard, easy. Didn't it?
Yeah.
Going to brake later, going to accelerate earlier, trust the process.
I think that's really interesting, that shift though from careful and perhaps cautious to carefree. And something that you spoke about before was using your emotional responses as feedback. And I fully agree with that. I think emotions are data points for us, and the most intelligent biofeedback tools that we have to let us know if we're on course or off course. And so I'm wondering, because you talked about that and limiting beliefs as well. So I always think about my journey. If I'm met with a task or a challenge, maybe there's a new project, maybe it's this podcast, and I'm like, I feel like slightly triggered or challenged, and the voice is like, oh, well, who do you think you are? There's so many podcasts out there, like, who's going to tune in? And you hear that voice, and I'm like, oh, that's really interesting, right?
Yeah.
Learning how to transcend that and be less triggered by leaning in and try and do some self-inquiry, like you spoke about before. Like, well, where's this voice coming from? Oh, it's probably possibly parents. Fear of failure, saying, don't dream too big. You can't be an astronaut, Dave, and this and that. And so,
fear of failure is a big one, by the way. It really stops us doing things. Because we don't want to be seen to fail in front of our peers or to ourselves or to our family or whatever, so we just don't try things. It's a lot safer not to do anything because then we don't fail and not get judged.
Absolutely.
Right? But we all know what the real answer is you just got to put your neck out. Right? And fail and learn and get stronger and get tougher and build muscle. The only way to do it is to fail. We don't think, we don't gain much from success, funnily enough. We gain a lot more from failure. We need to do more failure. It's a real thing in science, and, especially in the, just to take a side hustle at the moment, you think about so much change going on and, with AI, with climate change and, a lot of the challenges we've got, sort of at a macro level. The only way we're going to get through this is by more experimentation and more failure, right? More hypothesis testing. And the more of us that we understand that, we'll get closer to the truth. We'll fear less, right? Because we'll get closer to the answer. But we won't get closer to the answer unless we try some stuff. So it's incumbent on us all, both individually and in our own lives, to try stuff, to extend stuff, to flip our beliefs upside down, to keep experimenting and keep getting stronger and doing all of those things. And not only as an individuals, but also as organizations and governments and all of these things. We've just got to get a lot better at failure and experimenting and pushing this stuff around and flipping stuff upside down and testing the opposite and having a go if we're going to break away and really make a great success of this life.
For sure. Yeah, and it sounds like, from what you're saying, that the fear of failure is often the biggest barrier to experimentation.
It's that limit problem, right? We've got these limits, we fear of failure and love fun, some losses.
And I want to double click on something you said before around identifying these unconscious emotional responses that are playing out in your life. I always like to think of every trigger is actually like a bit of a blessing in many ways, because if something's like triggering me or something someone said, or, something didn't go my way and I noticed myself getting annoyed or frustrated, it's like, oh, that's really interesting. Like, what's going on there? And I base a lot of my work and just a lot of my philosophy on life and Carl Jung's work, who we've spoken about this around. One of my favorite quotes by him is, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will just call it fate. And so that can be a really confronting journey to walk down. It certainly has been for me to, notice, oh no, I failed at this thing, or something didn't work out with my relationship, or, drugs and alcohol, all these addictions are servicing, and I noticed these self-sabotaging patterns are playing out, and I really had to lean into that and ask myself, why am I getting treated? What's this unconscious theme that's really dragging my life and causing so much suffering? Can you perhaps take us on a journey around what did that look like for you in terms of perhaps one of the most uh, emotionally charged or emotions that are front of mind for you that have helped you dive deeper into your unconscious?
Good, David. And you asked me a question before we kicked off. Is there anything you don't want to talk about? And you went and talked about it, so that's good. No, but I think there's lots of those moments, by the way, and I think a few years ago, I went through a pretty tough separation, as many of us had, and I think it was a kind of an odd one for me because I'd been pretty, for a long time, physical health and wellness has been a big part of my life. Tried to be that way, but as part of it, actually, a couple of threads coming here together was part of the journey to sort of show you how it weaved up. But, lots of success, hitting lots of barriers and just ending up doing a lot of drinking and a lot of drugs as I was increasingly either egotistical about our success and celebrating with drugs and alcohol. And that's definitely a pathway in, the beginning of a lot of addiction. But also to make, we are as bad with failure as we are with success, and we'll drink and drug ourselves away from feeling those things. And so I've definitely, we have this massive success and we go out and start drinking and taking drugs as a celebration. Well, that's when I actually get comfortable with that level of success, which goes back to that upper limit belief problem. And likewise with failure, when we get into a place of failure, again, we go back to that sort of often, to drinking and drugs to kind of mask the thing and just make it all go away for a little while. And so we just get into these bad behaviors of making it all go away and stuff. And so, that's where it all, that's where all of that stuff starts, because we're just so bad at just being able to live inside the truth and inside the reality and just breathing it in and expanding into it. And this came to, a real head for me during the separation where I felt very, very attacked by the sister and by my ex, and the whole thing got, I'd already probably been drinking too much already, but then I really started bringing the hammer down a little bit. But then, and because I felt very alone, I felt very attacked. I couldn't find any lawyers to help me. And, I was like, I was fucked. And just thought, get to the end of the day and I'll be trying to run the business and, all this stuff was going on. I was like, oh, so I have a glass of wine and, maybe a whiskey. And so and then fortunately caught myself. And then this will double tap on a thing that you and I both thing. And then, had a psychoactive moment. We'll just leave it there for now. But then had a beautiful psychoactive moment, realized, that I could stop being the victim there, that it was all kind of done. And now it was, as always with life, you get to choose how you react and respond to stuff. I gave up drinking and, it was just for a week or a month, and now it's been well over 2 years. I think it's part of that journey around sobriety has just been so beautiful. And it's not for everybody, but it's an increasingly popular thing. And the biggest part of that is being able to learn to deal with failure and success in the moment, and to take a nice big kombucha. And if success happens, to go, I earned that. That was deserved and welcome, and just another stepping stone towards more success, abundance, and love. And I don't have to celebrate it particularly, which kind of seems into them. We like to celebrate. We've got to do something and just go and pop the champagne and thing. It seems so somehow Calvinistic or odd to go, it's just, that was expected. It's not that big a thing. I'm just getting ready for the next expansion on that. And so that's beginning. Likewise on a failure, to go, the best way to deal with this is take a big kombucha and figure out what I did wrong and figure out where the lesson is. I talked about this week. Where's the gold that I need to mine in that? Where's the nugget in there? Where's the nugget of the lesson? The real knowledge in that, and embrace. Can't do that hungover, actually. You just can't. It's fucking not there. You'd be scrambling around in the dark and the grubby dirt, and you still won't find it. You can only solve those problems with a clear mind to figure out that journey, and you can only do all of that sort of stuff. So I think that's a really long answer to that very simple question, but all of that comes together just in terms of some moments and, deep hurt or, really the deep pain, and just like, solve this, by finding the systems and understanding why, stop being the victim, become the player. How would Marcus Aurelius, what would Seneca's advice to you be right now? Right? Get up. This is not because of them, or this is all you. Whatever's going on for you right now, it's all yours. It's your responsibility. It's a result of your habits, your discipline, and all of the decisions you've made. It's what makes the different ones. But you can continue to be the victim and blame everybody else.
Beautiful share, brother. Thank you. Yeah, that's I really value that level of humility and awareness, because especially when you're in the thick of it and you're dealing with not only the psychological and emotional toll and a relationship breakdown, but then obviously the legal processes and the uncertainty of what's happening next and feeling attacked, like you mentioned. It's like getting bombarded from all different directions. So to have that shift out of a victim mindset, to ask yourself, what's the goal in this? It takes tons of courage. It takes tons. And what would you say was the goal in that experience? What was that the kernel of fruit or the lesson that you were able to take away from that experience?
One of my great mentors and investors at the time, hung particularly close with me through the process. And, said, I was coming from a place of lack. I felt very attacked financially, particularly. Also, emotionally, they'd written up this big affidavit about shit I was as a human being. And I chose not to respond at all to any of it. It's just like, I'm not going to attack her. Or I could get involved in this. You jump in with the pigs and you start rolling around in the mud, you just get dirty. So I'm not going there. You pigs can stay over there and do your mud snuffling. And a lot of that was due to, just some, how do I want to be here? And, and he was like, I was worried about it. He just turned around and said, Colin, you're going to make a lot of this. This is going to set you up to really understand how much money you really going to make. And when you look back about actually how much money you got to him, it'll be a small amount of money. It's like it's a small amount of money. You're worth so much more than that. You're going to be so far past that, it's not funny. And, it was because I believed that it became true. So I believe you. I changed my belief about what small or large is. And, in a very, very small period of time, that number had already been filled, and solved that problem.
How do you have that level of conviction and certainty in that? And because when you're in the thick of it, right, and this it can be easy for some to, like your point saying before, to feel victimized. How do you then pull this empowering belief out of the hat and really buy into it?
Well, in this environment, most people don't do that. So this leads to suicide. So if you look at the statistics around this stuff, this is how people killing themselves, because they feel like they're rat in the corner, and they feel that there is no hope and it's all fun. And that happens to a lot of people all the time. Not just for that situation, but many situations. And so it's a really, really great question. So it's not so much the answers, but it's feeling the question. So it's a great question, and I also need the answer, to be honest. But like a lot of these things, it's a community, and it's your friends, and it's your love, and it's people, people around you. And I was lucky to have just a simple thing. And but then I think the trick is that it's easy to say and it's hard to believe, which I think is what you're telling me. So it would have been easy for Ron to say that, and for me to go, yeah, whatever.
And you,
Thank you. But to have the meditation on it, you again, to go back to practices and habits and discipline. And I think, we talk, you talk about these things, what are your habits? What are your disciplines? What are your commitments? What is your initiative? What is this stoic? What is this, Yoko Willing? There's another, I love Yoko, for something to double tap on, Yoko Willing, the Navy SEAL guy, the field handbook for life, staff, he's very much no excuses that fly, it's like, so you do a bit of that and just go, how do you want to respond to this thing, right? What are you going to take from this? And so, how do you do that? Well, hopefully having good people around you. So, as I say, everybody, we're all one in life. Be very, very picky about who you hang out with, right? That's absolutely job one. We think it's about osmosis or whatever it is, but, whatever, name you want to use, but it comes down to this idea, I think, is best be very careful about who you hang out with. Life is energetic. If there's shit energy around you, you end up copying it. All of that stuff. So I think that's be really the key. Choose your mates and your work colleagues, and very, very careful about that. If you find things bad energy and people dragging you down, giving you bad advice, just run away. So you don't have to hang out with that stuff. And and then just set your targets. And just go, where do you want to be? So this is all going to shit. I'm sure. Check it out. Save it for everybody. You're not anything special here. I think that's one of the other things you see a lot of, you're special. No, it's special. It's nonsense. You're just you. You're a small bug in the world. Do get to choose how you want to respond to all of this stuff and where you want to set your sights and where you're going to point your So, you get that and you go, yeah, I'm going to. I don't want to be this victim, sniffling, victim, blah 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 in the corner, and I've got a dad to be, I've got a business to run, I've got people to lead, and they're all stuffing from their stuff, and they're looking for me for leadership, and I want to show them how you respond when the going gets tough. I'll show you how the tough get going, and it is with love, and it is with abundance, and it is with success. It's not with ego and anger. Fitness is with the things we all aspire to. So this is just a moment that's been given to you, served up perfectly on a plate as part of the gymnasium of life, to see whether you are the guy you tell us you are. And let's see how you get on here. And I've certainly seen those things as just exactly that. Bad stuff happens. You go, yeah, bring it on. I've got this, and I'm going to show you just how good I am.
Chills, big time. And I think that kind of mentality has really helped me as well around understanding that if I'm setting my sights on a goal and I have this, big, bold vision for my life or impact or whatever it is, and then I experience hardship, I can't be surprised, because it's like going to the gym. Of course, it has to happen. And it's happening in a very intelligently orchestrated way.
And it's going to hurt.
And it's going to hurt. It's going to hurt so much. I really relate to your journey with relationship breakdown and finding myself in this pit of despair and victimhood and self-loathing, and then realizing, well, okay, how much longer do I want to live like this for? How is it really serving me? And how can
because you created it all.
For sure.
All of that stuff, just your making. You made it all. Every single thing you did mounted to right now. What else did it?
How can people, to whoever's listening right now, let's say maybe they have experienced a relationship challenge or a business challenge or financial or health challenge, and it feels like their world's crumbling down. They've been slapped across the face, kicked in the groin, they've curveball.
They were hopeless.
How can someone go from pointing the finger externally to start pointing it internally and reclaiming that accountability, like you spoke about in leadership, and you really want to model that for your team members and show them what that looks like by leading yourself first? Like how can whoever's listening right now start that process of self-inquiry?
I think take second position or superposition. This idea, it's a, concept in physics or metaphysics. This idea of superposition says, so caught up in this thing, like you're right here living this thing, just zoom out. Take the superposition, lift out. Take, whatever metaphor that suits you. It might be you might be your dead grandfather, be your idea of a god. It might be your idea of a philosophy. It might be Marcus Aurelius. It might be Jocko Willink. It might be Tony Robbins. It might be David Titeu. Just take a superposition, zoom out. How would the universe, how would the person that I love, how would this person I respect, someone I honor, how would they, how would they see this? What would be the answer they would give me? And the answer. I'm struggling and I don't know. What's the answer? I don't know. Yes, you do, actually. Inside of you, you really know. You just have to have courage and the conviction and the kahunas and the chops to have a little tear and have a little cry, It's okay. We'll tear up and cry and she'll do that. And then as you do that, realize that we're crying because we've just come face to face with the truth. It's nice, always a memory when we cry. It's a deep truth, it's a deep love, and that's why we feel so uncomfortable with it, because it's so bad, the success and truth of love. A little tear, and that's it. That's where the answer is. Right? Breathe in and go, yeah, I've got this. It's the same way that the little kid in the little footy ground where he, gets knocked over and he has a little tear. Mum comes along and goes, it's okay, Johnny. Pick yourself up, go and score that goal and go and knock that guy down that knocked you down and go and give him a punch on my nose and go and score that goal. Yep, I got it, man. You just have that little conversation with yourself and pick yourself up and get it.
And I think that frame around, speaking to yourself as a parent would to a child, I think is really, really powerful. I've spoken about it in an earlier episode as well, which I think is powerful because you are effectively always parenting yourself when you're having that dialogue. I believe like all versions of you are within you, the 1-year-old, the 2-year-old, the 3-year-old, the 4-year-old, etc. And, when you're having that conversation internally, you're having conversations with that version of yourself, with all versions. Use your, your experience of fatherhood as a blueprint for how I want to talk to myself as well, which has been really inspiring around, how do I want to empower myself as I would to a child of my own? How can I, give myself a permission slip to express myself vulnerably, to take a risk, to really back myself in, and to remind myself, like you said, that, I've got it, that I've got it. So how does that look like for you in fatherhood, out of curiosity?
I think another of my, favorite guides on the journey has been, I'm a Brené Brown fan.
Yes, she's a queen.
She's a queen. And, Dare to Lead is such a great story. She would just say, there's so much power and vulnerability because it demonstrates that we don't all have to walk around the world with this huge suit of armor on. It just gets us nowhere. It just deflects all the learnings, which that's meant to be coming at you, right? But then when you truly get, and I can't articulate it as well as she does, an absolute thesis from Brené and this whole thing about, it's not about being right, it's about getting it right. Like that's just so much wisdom there. But I think, my thing is that absolutely leading the values is important, right? So it's not about, because kids don't listen to you. They just watch you. Right? And then judge the fuck out of you. It's not your behavior. And then you go and tell them to do something opposite and don't, do as I say, not as I do. And they're like, shut up, Mr. Wisdom, and look at you in your life. Then Bruce, all right. And so I think very much around, being vulnerable. And, as you say, like, to your team or to your children or your friends, or saying, I haven't done this before. How do we do this? Right? I've never child or cared at 14. I've never parented a child at 8. I'm going to try some stuff. We'll see if it works together. So that she's good at doing that stuff, right? And so, and what that allows is two things. First of all, to get it right, not be right, right? To recognize that whatever's in front of you right now is a brand new, unique situation that you've never seen before in this manifestation. And it's going to require a curious approach to fix. And every instance in life is this way. You think you've seen this before, but you actually haven't, not in this configuration. And so the only way to solve it is with an open mind and an open heart and incredible amounts of curiosity, and bring some of experience and test a few things and see if it's going to work. And it doesn't matter whether it's hammering a picture or trying to put a tire on a bicycle or trying to solve some emotional crisis. It's all going to be a little bit like that. I'm going to try some stuff and see if it figures it out. We're going to go together. Your ideas, my ideas, let's go. And it gives people confidence to explore and do it with you and grow into it. And it gives them secondarily the skills to approach life like that. So not only do you solve the problem, which is kind of nice, but you also build the skills to solve it the next time, and build this vulnerability and build these sorts of ideas into the thing. And it allows people to expand into it, and it gives people space where eventually you can start bleeding, not just from in front, but most importantly from behind. Give people a tap on the bum, put them into the thing. So don't just go out there and lawnmower parent, helicopter parent, and solve all the problems. They don't allow that. I am people allow the kids to fall over, be there to provide the support, solve the problem together, give them problem solving skills, give them confidence, all of those sorts of things. But get out of their way, give them the space, and give them the support as part of that process. Really not just trying to solve the problem in front of you, you're trying to give them the life skills so that when you die, which could be soon, and hopefully before they do, they're able to take the mantle and go forward. This fundamental Maori tradition of rangatira tangata, this rope of mankind, where we look back to the past, to our heritage and our grandfathers and ancestry, to be proud of what they've given us, and to thank them for that, and to take the mantle forward, and then to prepare the children to lift it up from you, and to keep the rope of mankind moving and keep it strong. And that's your role. So I think those things around formulate how I think about parenting and leadership and all of that stuff. Just, we're here to make everyone strong. We're not here for our own ego and to tell people how smart and clever and leader we are. We're just here to harden everyone.
Yeah, beautiful. And that's, I think, it can be a really difficult balance to strike. And I think we've spoken about this around, maybe it does require going through a suffering or a series of pains and hardships and challenges to loosen the grip of the ego over you, to make you realize, I don't actually have to have all the answers. I'm allowed to admit that I don't really know what I'm doing, or I need some help, or
there's real strength in there, and that's the weirdness of it. Is that there's strength and a resilience and vulnerability. We've been taught that's the opposite. We've been taught that somehow vulnerability is a weakness. We attach vulnerability to weakness somehow. It's not. It's the opposite of that. It takes incredible amounts of courage and strength to be vulnerable and available. And I kind of caught myself a little bit there as we're trying to harden everybody up, but I kind of mean we're trying to harden everybody up with softness and vulnerability. Where our words are always seem incredibly useless and hopeless, but we're trying to be resilient and tough and available and soft and loving and abundant. But fundamentally, we're just, we're trying to be just ready for life. And so that's really what I mean by that. Right? But that point is important, I think, that it takes incredible amounts of strength and courage and toughness to be vulnerable and to be available for the goal that's there in front of you, hidden under the leaves of your shambles and disaster that's coming.
Yeah, and I think it's like, it brings humanity into the picture.
Love that.
I really think so. That's what I've noticed. And I still catch myself, I'm not perfect at this, because there are moments, where I catch myself slipping into ego mode, where I think I have all the answers, and I'm like kind of directing or preaching or teaching, and it's not coming from that like real soul-led, authentic, vulnerable place, and I have to catch myself. And it's still an ongoing practice that I'm working on. But I notice that when I really drop my guard and someone asks me, well, how are you really doing? Or what's been going on? And I really open up about the challenges that I'm facing and how I'm scared and how, I'm worried or I'm anxious or I'm stressed, and it just creates this like strong bridge of trust, and it kind of, I feel like
Honesty.
and it turns out also permission to, I can be human in this interaction, and it goes from like me versus you to it's us, and because you talked about leadership there as well, I think that's something that it's an ongoing discussion in the leadership space, right, around trying to balance or learning how to be more vulnerable, as Brene would say. How do you, what does that look like at Moroku? And I want to hear a bit more about that, so listeners can find out a bit more about Moroku and your philosophy on finance and all of that. But before we dive into it, like how do you manage to strike that balance between, hey, I'm vulnerable, I'm letting my guard down, I'm showing you parts of myself that perhaps I don't always show, while doing so in a grounded way that's appropriate for the workplace? Because one of my mates, Scott, talks to me about vulnerability without competency, for instance, can actually lead to disaster.
He's good, Scott.
Absolutely. So what does that look like for you at Moroku? How do you role model vulnerability in the workplace?
I think like we've been talking about, really, I don't have a different model for life and work and, everything. It's just me, and everybody gets the same version of me, hopefully, as I'm growing and learning. So, that's it. So, yeah, I just think there's anything different between. I certainly challenge people to do that and just be you, be authentic. Realize that all of these things, whether it's a work environment or a family environment or a social environment, try desperately hard not to be some caricature of yourself. Whatever it is, it's just another part of the lab. These things are just part of your laboratory. It's just a part of what's been laid up to explore. And, I don't have to take some mantle of being an entrepreneur or tech guy or this thing. We're only borrowing those titles because we don't really understand who we are. So we grasp in that sort of, I don't be like, you're going to be like Larry Ellison, or you're going to be like Elon Musk. It's going to be me. It's me. I'm going to, and I want to do that for two reasons, right? Because I want to be me. Actually, I really want to find out who I am and what my power is and what my super strengths are. And I want to expand into that without any delusions or illusions or anything else. So I want to be this raw, kind of no rules existence, committed to that idea. And I'm committed to it because it feels really right. But I'm also committed to it in a leadership position because I want to allow everyone else to do that too. And I want to allow, and so if I'm being this other thing, then I'm not giving them the space. Now they're trying to figure out who they need to be, which is completely a nonsense. Yourself's the answer. Right. And I want to make sure I'm giving everybody the space to do that and show them how to do it, right? Learn how to do that, take feedback if I'm not doing it properly. And, fortunately, with Michael and the rest of my leadership and, around, we're committed to this thing. We talk about it hard, and we know about processes. We're giving feedback, holding ourselves accountable to all of this stuff, to be really raw and be honest and be vulnerable and do all of that stuff and hold it as a core thing, right? Really lovely to see the Netflix team, take the leadership team to go away recently on their retreat and talk nothing about business. And talk nothing about, quarterly results or annual results or visions and missions and all this standard play called nonsense. But just to turn up and to go, this is all going to actually be dependent on our ethics and our values and how we behave. And if we get the behaviors right, the magic book. Beautiful if we can find it. There's plenty of stuff around the internet about what they've done there. And it's a really nice reminder And there's a reason that business is absolutely kicking ass. It's just a great business. It's so well led. We all know the story, and we're all climbed in, and we're all customers. And when I read Hastings, it's just a genius. So many levels, and there he goes again, right? What's your playbook, Reed? What's your OKRs and your QPRs? It's just build great talent density and be raw and be human and drive ethics and get the values and belief systems in place. You get that working, people make great decisions and deliver great outcomes and take awesome actions. That's all I got for you. Yeah, it's just that. That's the thing. Like, can I give people discipline habits, believe in the fundamentals of the behaviours there? The rest of this looks after itself, because you got people in the right place at the right time to deal with that particular situation and get the right answer, as opposed to trying to figure out how the playbook would solve for it, because the playbook wasn't been built for that thing, because it hasn't seen that thing before.
And it's just like slapping a band-aid solution as opposed to going to the root cause, which is, what does everyone believe in?
I'll play some answer that was good maybe a week ago or 10 weeks ago. It's completely irrelevant now because the word universe just shifted.
So what would you say is the most, or one of the most important belief systems that you've established?
Well, we only have one value. We started out with 3, but that was too complicated. Because asked, which value? So a few years ago, I decided to have one value, and it just kind of drives everything. And that's courage. And, it's actually quite complicated, courage. And it's not what it looks like on the tin, by the way. It's not bravado. That's not courage. It starts with, talk about having the courage to step up, having the courage to speak out, to be you, to help, to improve, to do that. But then also the back end, when we make a decision, you should just have the courage to tuck in. I said my thing, and I gave my perspective, and we batted that around, and we had that debate, and we did that thing, and we decided that now we are going to do this thing, and I'm going to have the courage to just go, yep. So yeah, I have So just I think that's that thing. If I believe that if you live a courageous life, and everyone is living courageously and being vulnerable, these things we talk about, then magic will happen. And that build a culture.
Yeah, there's a real common thread, and I think that really runs through our entire discussion,